Hello, First Baptist. This week we're finishing Romans, beginning 1 Corinthians, and continuing Israel's wilderness journey in Numbers. While these books are very different, they ask us an important question. Will God's people trust his wisdom or insist on their own? In Romans 16, this is the end. Romans ends much differently than many people expect. Instead of a deep theology, Paul gives us a long list of names. But these names remind us that the gospel isn't merely an idea, it's lived out by real churches and real people. Paul thanks men and women who have served faithfully, risked their lives for Christ, opened their homes, and labored for the gospel. The Christian life has never been a solo endeavor. God builds his church through ordinary believers serving one another. Paul also gives one final warning to watch out for those who create divisions by teaching contrary to the gospel. Even after 16 chapters explaining salvation by grace, Paul knows that the churches must continue guarding the truth. Now, if Romans presents a healthy theological foundation, 1 Corinthians immediately shows us what happens when a church loses sight of it. The church in Corinth is filled with division. Some say that they follow Paul, others Apollos, others Peter. Some even claim to follow Christ in a way that separates them from everyone else. Paul's answer is simple. Christ is not divided. Instead of boasting in gifted leaders, believers should only boast in the cross. The message of Christ crucified looks foolish to the world, but it is God's wisdom and God's power. Throughout these opening chapters, Paul reminds the Corinthians that Christian leadership isn't about celebrity, popularity, or eloquence. Ministers are simply servants and stewards entrusted with God's message. The church belongs to Christ alone. And then in Numbers 16 through 20, Israel faces one rebellion after another. Korah challenges Moses and Aaron, questioning God's appointed leadership. God responds decisively, showing that this rebellion is ultimately against him. Even Moses, one of Scripture's greatest leaders, fails to honor God fully when he strikes the rock instead of speaking to it. Because of that act of disobedience, Moses is told he will not lead Israel into the promised land. These chapters also include the death of Miriam, the death of Aaron, the bronze serpent lifted up in the wilderness, and Israel's victories over several enemy kings as they draw closer to Canaan. Again and again, we see both God's holiness and his remarkable patience. Israel repeatedly rebels, and God continues to preserve his people. So as we read this week, watch for one common thread running through all of these chapters. Human pride always leads to division and rebellion. Whether it's Korah rejecting God's authority, the Corinthians dividing over personalities, or false teachers threatening the church in Romans, the root problem is the same. People trusting themselves more than God. But God's answer is also the same. He calls his people to humility, faithfulness, and unity centered on him. God points his people away from themselves and back to his gracious provision. Ultimately, these chapters prepare us to see our need for our perfect leader, Jesus Christ, who never failed, never sought his own glory, and perfectly shepherds his people.